Hi guys, it's so good to be here with you again. I'm going to continue reading the book Make Your Bed, starting from chapter 4. So it's time for you to sit back, relax, and enjoy it. Chapter 4. Life is not fair. Drive on. If you want to change the world, get over being a sugar cookie and keep moving forward. I ran to the top of the sand dune and without hesitation sprinted down the other side, heading full speed towards the Pacific Ocean. Fully clothed in my green utilities, shore-built hat, and combat boots, I dove headfirst into the waves as they pounded the beach of Coronado, California. Emerging soaking wet from the water, I saw the SEAL instructor standing on the dune, with his arms folded and a piercing glare that cut through the morning haze. I heard him yell, "You know what to do, Mr. Mac." Indeed, I did. With a faint enthusiasm, I screamed a hearty "Hoo-yah! Hoo-yah!" at the top of my lungs, and fell face down into the soft sand, rolling from side to side to ensure that no part of my uniform was left uncovered. Then, for good measure, I sat up, reached deep into the ground, and tossed the sand into the air to guarantee it found its way into every crevice in my body. Somewhere during the morning's physical training, I had committed a violation of the SEAL training rules. My punishment was to jump into the surf zone, roll around in the sand, and make myself a sugar cookie. In all of SEAL training, there was nothing more uncomfortable than being a sugar cookie. There were a lot of things more painful and more exhausting, but being a sugar cookie tested your patience and your determination. Not just because you spend the rest of the day with sand down your neck, under your arms, and between your legs, but because the act of becoming a sugar cookie was completely indiscriminate. There was no rhyme or reason. You became a sugar cookie at the whim of the instructor. To many of the SEAL trainees, this was hard to accept. Those that strived to be the very best expected that they would be rewarded for their stellar performance. Sometimes they were, and then again, sometimes they were not. Sometimes the only thing they got for all their effort was wet and sandy. Feeling like I was sufficiently coated with the sand, I ran to the instructor, yelled, "Oh yeah!" again, and came to attention. Looking me over to see if I met his standard of excellence in sugar cookies was Lieutenant Philip L. Martin, known to his friends as Moki or Mogi. I, however, was not on a first name basis with Lieutenant Martin. Moki Martin was the quintessential frogman, born and raised in Hawaii. He was everything I strived to be as a SEAL officer. An experienced Vietnam veteran, he was expert with every weapon in the SEAL inventory. He was one of the finest skydivers in the teams. And being a native Hawaiian, he was so skilled in the water that there were few, if any, who could match him. Mr. Mac, do you have any idea why you are a sugar cookie this morning? Martin said in a very calm but questioning manner. No, Instructor Martin, I dutifully responded. Because, Mr. Mac, life isn't fair, and the sooner you learn that, the better you'll be. A year later, Lieutenant Martin and I were on a first name basis. I had completed basic SEAL training, and he had been reassigned from the training center to underwater demolition team 11 Coronado. The more I got to know Mogi, the deeper my respect grew for him. In addition to being a superb sea operator, Mogi was also a phenomenal athlete. In the early 1980s, he was on the leading edge of the triathlon craze. He had a beautiful freestyle stroke in the open ocean. His calves and thighs were strong and moved him effortlessly on the long runs. But his real advantage was the bicycle. He and the bike were made for each other. Every morning, he would mount the bike and go for a 30-mile ride up and down the Coronado Silver Strand. There was a flat stretch of paved bike path that paralleled the Pacific Ocean. It ran from the city of Coronado to the city of Imperial Beach, with the ocean on one side and the bay on the other. It was one of the most beautiful sections of beach in California. Early on Saturday morning, Moki was out on a training ride along the silver string. Head down, pedaling fast, he never saw the oncoming bicycle. At roughly 25 miles an hour, the two bikes collided head on. The bikes crumpled from the impact, slamming the riders together, leaving both men face down on the asphalt path. The first rider rolled over, dusted himself off, and struggled to his feet. He was banged up, but otherwise fine. Moki remained face down, unable to move. The paramedics arrived within minutes, stabilized Moki, and transported him to the hospital. Initially, there was hope that the paralysis was temporary, but as the days, months, and years passed, Moki never regained the use of his legs. The crash left him paralyzed from the waist down with limited movement in his arms. For the past 35 years, Moki has been in a wheelchair. In all those years, I never once heard him complain about his misfortune in life. Never once did I hear him ask, "Why me?" Never once did he display an ounce of pity for himself. In fact, after his accident, Moki went on to be an accomplished painter. He fathered a beautiful young girl. He founded and continues to oversee the Super Frog Triathlon that is held every year in Coronado. It's easy to blame your lot in life on some outside force. To stop trying because you believe fate is against you. It's easy to think that where you were raised, how your parents treat you, or what school you went to is all that determines your future. Nothing could be further from the truth. The common people and the gray men and women are all defined by how they deal with life's unfairness. Helen Keller, Nelson Mandela, Stephen Hawking, Malala Yousafzai, and Malcolm Martin. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, no matter how good you are, you still end up as a sugar cookie. Don't complain. Don't blame it on your misfortune. Stand tall, look to the future, and drive on. Chapter 5. Failure can make you stronger. If you want to change the world, don't be afraid of the circus. The waves off Coronado Island were choppy, the small white caps slapping us in the face as we side-stroked back toward the beach. As usual, my swim buddy and I were struggling to keep up with the rest of the SEAL training class. The instructors on the safety boat were yelling for us to pick up the pace, but it seemed like the harder we swam, the farther we fell behind. My swim buddy that day was Ensign Mark Thomas. Like me, Mark had received his commission through the Reserve Officers Training Corps, ROTC. He was a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute and one of the best long-distance runners in class. In SEAL training, your swim buddy was the person you relied on to have your back. It was your swim buddy who you were physically tied to on the underwater dives. It was your swim buddy who you were partnered with on the long swings. Your swim buddy helped you study, kept you motivated, and became your closest ally throughout training. And as swim buddies, if one of you failed an event, both of you suffered the consequences. It was the instructor's way of reinforcing the importance of teamwork. As we finished the swim and crossed onto the beach, a SEAL instructor was waiting for us. "Drop down," the instructor yelled. This was the command to fall into the push-up position. Back straight, arms fully extended, and head up. "You two call yourselves officers?" There was no point in answering. We both knew he would continue. "Officers in the SEAL teams lead the way. They don't come in last on the swims. They don't embarrass their class." The instructor moved around us, kicking sand in our faces as he circled. "I don't think you gentlemen are going to make it. I don't think you have what it takes to be SEAL officers." Pulling a small black notebook from his back pocket, he looked at us with disgust and jotted something in the book. "You two just made the circus list." He shook his head. "You'll be lucky if you survive another week." The circus. It was the last thing either Mark or I wanted. The circus was held every afternoon at the end of the training. The circus was another 2 hours of additional calisthenics combined with non-stop harassment by SEAL combat veterans who wanted only the strong to survive training. If you failed to meet the standard on any event that day, calisthenics, the obstacle course, the timed runs, or the swims, your name was on the list. In the eyes of the instructors, you were a failure. What made the circus so feared by the students was not just the additional pain, but also the knowledge that the day after the circus, you would be exhausted from the extra workout and so fatigued that you would fail to meet the standards again. Another circus would follow, then another and another. It was a death spiral, a cycle of failure that caused many students to quit training. As the rest of the students completed the day's events, Mark and I, along with several others, assembled on the asphalt grinder to begin another long session of calisthenics. Because we had come in last on the swing, the instructors had tailored the circles just for us that day. Flutter kicks, lots and lots of flutter kicks. The flutter kicks were designed to strengthen your abdominals and thighs so you could power your way through the long open ocean swings. They were also designed to break you. The flutter kick exercise called for you to lie on your back with legs extended directly in front of you and your hands behind your head. As the instructor counted repetitions, you alternated moving your legs up and down in a kicking motion. At no time during the exercise were you allowed to bend your knees. Bending your knees was considered weakness among frogmen. The circus was punishing. Hundreds of flutter kicks as well as push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, and 8-count bodybuilders. By the time the sun went down, Mark and I could barely move. Failure had a price. The next day brought more calisthenics, another run, another obstacle course, another swing, and unfortunately another circus. More sit-ups, more push-ups, and a lot more flutter kicks. But as the circuses continued, a funny thing happened. Our swims got better and Mark and I began to move up in the pack. The circus, which had started as a punishment for failure, was making us stronger, faster, and more confident in the water. While other students quit, unable to handle the occasional failure and the pain it brought, Mark and I were determined not to allow the circus to beat us. As training was coming to an end, there was one final open ocean swim, a 5-miler off the coast of San Clemente Island. Completing it in the allowable time was essential to graduating from SEAL training. The water was bitterly cold as we jumped off the pier and into the ocean. 15 swim pairs entered the water and began the long trek out of the small bay. Around the peninsula and over the kelp beds. After about 2 hours, the swim pairs were so spread out you couldn't tell where you were in the pack. 4 hours into the swim, numb, exhausted, and on the verge of a hypothermia, Mark Thomas and I crossed the beach. There, waiting at the surf's edge, was the instructor. "Drop down," he yelled. My hands and feet were so cold I couldn't feel the sand beneath my fingers and toes. With my head straining to keep upright, all I could see was the instructor's boot as he walked around Mark and me. "Once again, you two officers have embarrassed your class." Another set of boots appeared in my view, and then another. Several instructors were now surrounding us. "You have made all your teammates look bad." He paused. "Hik over, gentlemen." As Mark and I got to our feet, we looked around the beach and suddenly realized we were the first swim pair to finish. "You embarrassed them all right," the instructor smiled. "The second pair isn't even in sight." Mark and I turned to look toward the ocean, and sure enough, there was no one in view. "Well done, gentlemen. It looks like all the extra pain and suffering paid off." The instructor paused, stepped over, and shook our hands. "I'll be honored to serve with you when you get to the teams." We had made it. The long swim was the final tough event of training. Several days later, Mark and I graduated. Mark went on to have a distinguished career in the SEAL teams, and we remain close friends to this day. In life, you face a lot of circuses. You pay for your failures, but if you persevere, if you let those failures teach you and strengthen you, then you'll be prepared to handle life's toughest moments. July 1983 was one of those tough moments. As I stood before the commanding officer, I thought my career as a Navy SEAL was over. I had just been relieved of my SEAL squadron, fired for trying to change the way my squadron was organized, trained, and conducted missions. There were some magnificent officers and enlisted men in the organization. Some of the most professional warriors I had ever been around. However, much of the culture was still rooted in the Vietnam era, and I thought it was time for a change. As I was to find out, change is never easy, particularly for the person in charge. Fortunately, even though I was fired, my commanding officer allowed me to transfer to another SEAL team, but my reputation as a SEAL officer was severely damaged. Everywhere I went, other officers and enlisted men knew I had failed, and every day there were whispers and subtle reminders that maybe I wasn't up to the task of being a SEAL. At that point in my career, I had two options: quit and move on to civilian life, which seemed like the logical choice in light of my recent officer fitness report, or weather the storm and prove to others and myself that I was a good sea officer. I chose the latter. Soon after being fired, I was given a second chance, an opportunity to deploy overseas as the officer in charge of a SEAL platoon. Most of the time on that overseas deployment, we were in remote locations, isolated and on our own. I took advantage of the opportunity to show that I could still lead. When you live in close quarters with 12 SEALs, there isn't anywhere to hide. They know if you are giving 100% on the morning workout. They see when you are the first in line to jump out of the airplane and last in line to get the chow. They watch you clean your weapon, check your radio, read the intelligence, and prepare your mission briefs. They know when you have worked all night preparing for tomorrow's training. As month after month of the overseas deployment wore on, I used my previous failure as motivation to outwork, out-hustle, and outperform everyone in the platoon. I sometimes fell short of being the best, but I never fell short of giving it my best. In time, I regained the respect of my men. Several years later, I was selected to command a SEAL team of my own. Eventually, I would go on to command all the SEALs on the West Coast. By 2003, I found myself in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now that I was a one-star admiral leading troops in a war zone, every decision I made had its consequences. Over the next several years, I stumbled often, but for every failure, for every mistake, there were hundreds and hundreds of successes. Hostages rescued, suicide bombers stopped, pirates captured, terrorists killed, and countless lives saved. I realized that the past failures had strengthened me, taught me that no one is immune from mistakes. True leaders must learn from their failures, use the lessons to motivate themselves, and not be afraid to try again or make the next tough decision. You can't avoid the circus. At some point, we all make the list. Don't be afraid of the circus. Chapter 6. You must dare greatly. If you want to change the world, slide down the obstacle head first. Standing at the edge of the 30-foot tower, I grabbed the thick nylon rope. One end of the rope was attached to the tower and the other end anchored on the ground to a pole 100 feet away. I was halfway through the seal obstacle course and I was on a record pace, swinging my legs over the top of the line and holding on for dear life. I began to inch my way off the platform, my body hanging underneath the rope, and with a caterpillar-like motion, I slowly made my way, foot by foot, to the other end. As I reached the end, I released my grip on the line, dropped into the soft sand, and ran to the next obstacle. The other students in my class were yelling encouragement, but I could hear the swim instructor calling out the minutes. I had lost a lot of time on this slide for life. My possum-style technique of negotiating the long rope was just too slow, but somehow I couldn't bring myself to slide down the rope head first. Going head first off the tower using a method called the commando style was much faster but also much riskier. You were less stable on the top of the rope than hanging underneath, and if you fell and injured yourself, you'd be washed out of the class. I crossed the finish line with a disappointing time. As I was doubled over trying to catch my breath, a grizzled old Vietnam vet with highly polished boots and a heavily starched green uniform stood hunched over me. "When are you going to learn, Mr. Mac?" he said with an unmistakable tone of contempt. "The obstacle course is going to beat you every time unless you start taking some risks." 1 week later, I pushed my fears aside, mounted the top of the rope, and thrust my body headfirst down the slide for life. As I crossed the finish line in a personal best, I could see the old Vietnam SEAL nodding his approval. It was a simple lesson in overcoming your anxieties and trusting your abilities to get the job done. The lesson would serve me well in the years to come. It was Iraq in 2004. The voice on the other end of the radio was calm but had an unmistakable sense of urgency. The 3 hostages we were searching for had been located. Al-Qaeda terrorists were holding them in a walled compound on the outskirts of Baghdad. Unfortunately, intelligence indicated that terrorists were about to move the men, and we had to act quickly. The Army Lieutenant Colonel in charge of the rescue mission informed me that they would have to conduct a dangerous daylight raid. To make matters worse, the only way to be successful was to land 3 Black Hawk helicopters carrying the assault force into the middle of the small compound. We talked through other tactical options, but it was clear the colonel was right. It was preferable to conduct a rescue mission at night when the element of surprise was on your side. But this was a fleeting opportunity, and if we didn't act now, the hostage would be moved and possibly killed. I approved the mission, and within minutes, the rescue force had boarded the three Black Hawk helicopters and was on its way to the compound. High above the Black Hawks, another helicopter was providing video surveillance back to my headquarters. I watched in silence as the three helicopters skimmed across the desert, just a few feet above the ground to hide their approach. Inside the open courtyard, I could see one man, armed with an automatic weapon, moving in and out of the building, seemingly preparing to leave. The helos were 5 minutes out, and all I could do from my headquarters was listen to the internal communications as the rescue force made final preparations. This was not the first hostage rescue I had overseen, nor would it be the last, but it was clearly the most daring in light of the need to gain surprise by landing inside the compound. While the pilots from the Army Aviation Unit were the best in the world, this was still a high-risk mission. Three helicopters with blades extending beyond 60 feet were going to land in a space with only inches to spare. Adding to the level of difficulty was an 8-foot high brick wall that surrounded the compound, forcing the pilots to dramatically alter their approach angle. It was going to be a hard landing, and over the radio I could hear the rescue force preparing for impact. From the overhead surveillance, I could see the helicopter's final approach. The first aircraft flew flat and level, and then as it crossed over the wall, the helo flared upward, settling into the tiny courtyard. Immediately, the rescue force exited the Black Hawk and began surging into the building. The second helo, right on the tail of the first, landed within a few feet of the companion. Dirt from the downwash of the helicopters caused a cloud of dust to encircle the landing area. As the third helo approached the compound, a giant plume of dust temporarily blinded the pilot. The front of the third helo inched over the wall, but the rear wheel clipped the 8-foot high barricade, throwing bricks everywhere. With no room to spare, the pilot forced the helo to the ground with a thud, but everyone inside was unharmed. Minutes later, I received word that all the hostages were safe. Within 30 minutes, the rescue force and the freed men were on their way back to safety. The gamble had paid off. Over the course of the next decade, I would come to realize that assuming risk was typical of our Special Operations Force. They always pushed the limits of themselves and their machines in order to be successful. In many ways, this is what set them apart from everyone else. However, contrary to what outsiders saw, the risk was usually calculated, thoughtful, and well planned. Even if it was spontaneous, the operators knew their limits but believed in themselves enough to try. Throughout my career, I always had great respect for the British Special Air Service, the famed SAS. The SAS motto was, "Who dares, wins." The motto was so widely admired that even moments before the Bin Laden raid, My command Sergeant Major Chris Ferris quoted to the SEALs preparing for the mission. To me, the motto was more than about how the British Special Forces operated as a unit. It was about how each of us should approach our lives. Life is a struggle, and the potential for failure is ever present. But those who live in fear of failure or hardship or embarrassment will never achieve their potential. Without pushing our limits, without occasionally sliding down the rope head first, without daring greatly, you never know what is truly possible in your life. So guys, I just read 3 chapters of this book. I'm gonna stop here and you reflect about the words you heard. In the next video, I'll finish it for you. Okay, now you have a good night's sleep. Now you close your eyes